Welcome. Today we're going to revisit the scenario that we looked at in the flow workshop so that you can recreate it yourselves if you so wish. So if you recall, our scenario was this. Jane has recently started working as a Salesforce admin for Bikes & Co. She's very happy with the company and is looking for ways to improve their Salesforce org and help the business grow. Her predecessor was quite on top of things and followed best practice. However, she noticed there are still a few active workflows, so she decided to start migrating them to Flow. One of them is the workflow on the opportunity called Close Opportunity When Lost Reason is Filled, and this seems like a good starting point. She also receives a message from the sales manager about the possibility of helping them out with a tedious task. Jane learns that agents often forget to add required fields when creating multiple contacts off an account object. So this would be helpful to create some sort of a screen flow to guide them through the process. Okay, so let's start by revisiting the existing workflow so that she can migrate this to Flow. This is my org, and let's go to the setup menu to go and find this workflow rule. The easiest way to get to workflow rules is to use the quick find box above the menu. And as you start typing, you'll see that the options filter and we click into workflow rules. When we get here, we'll see that we do have a workflow rule that meets this current scenario. Close opportunity when lost reason is complete. And we can see that it's active because of the checkbox over here, or because in the actions column, we have the option to deactivate. Let's click in and see what this rule is actually doing. I'm going to view this in edit mode because I think it's slightly simpler to understand. Because the previous admin was conscientious, you'll see that they put in a description, which is really useful because we can see what the purpose of this workflow rule is: to close the opportunity when lost reason is completed. Evaluation criteria. This rule is evaluated when the record is created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet criteria. This means that if we edit the field and it didn't meet the entry criteria previously, but it does now, this will fire. And then the actual criteria. We're looking on the opportunity object for a field called close lost reason, and we're saying not equal to blank. This is when this rule will fire. Well, what's it actually going to do? This is where the workflow actions come in, and we can see that we have a field update. The description implies that it's going to change the stage field to close lost. So let's look at this. The object is opportunity. It's going to update on the opportunity object, the field called stage, which happens to be a pick list, and the new value is close lost. So the description, or the name in this case, does imply exactly what this field update is going to do. Okay, well, the purpose of this is we want to transfer this to Flow. So the first thing that I'm going to have to do is to deactivate the rule. The first thing that you're going to need to do, if you're following along, is create the field called close lost reason in your orgs, because it is not a standard field, it won't already exist. To do that, we're going to go to the object manager. We're going to find our opportunity object, again by using the filter. And then we're going to click on fields and relationships. You are going to hit new. Now you can set up this field in a couple of different ways. You could just set it up as a straight text field. In my org, I'm choosing to set this up as a pick list. So I'm using pick list, then label, reason for loss. I'm going to enter the values separated by a new line. Now I'm actually going to cut and paste these in because I have them on a notepad sat here. But the values that I'm putting in for reason for loss are price, features, stock availability, no response, or other. I'm going to give it a description. Because all good admins should be adding descriptions so that you know exactly the purpose of every field or flow or anything like that if someone else revisits it in the future. On the next screen, we're going to make it visible to everyone. And then on the next screen, we're going to add it to all of our layouts. Now, you obviously might want to pick and choose which page layout you want to put it on. I'm just going for all of them for simplicity. And then we hit the save button. So having created our field, reason for loss, we're now going to think about creating our flow. We go back to home, and this time we type flow in the quick find, and we come into flows. And we immediately start by hitting the new flow button. The next few screens you're going to see are quite wordy, but if you read what is written on them, they guide you to making the right choices. The first thing you're being asked is, what type of flow do you want to create? If you think about what we're trying to do, we're trying to update a record when another field on the same record is changed. Let's read down the options. The first option is a screen flow, and it says that this is guiding users through a business process. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not guiding the users, we just want it to do something. The next option is the schedule triggered flow, and it says this launches at a specific time and frequency for each record in a batch. Well, we're not trying to do this at 10 o'clock every day or every Monday in the month. This is an immediate action that we want when we've made a change. So this isn't for us either. The next option is the auto-launched flow. And this says it launches when invoked by Apex processes, REST API, and more. So this means that something else that's already been fired and is currently running calls the flow. That's not what we want either. The next option is the record triggered flow. Launches when a record is created, updated, or deleted. Well, think about it. This is exactly what we're trying to do. When we edit a field on the record, we want to go and change another field on the record. So this is the one we're going to choose. Next, you're going to be asked whether you want to build freeform or auto layout. I would recommend that you choose auto layout, because this then takes care of putting all of your elements on your canvas. Now we have to configure our record triggered flow. This is probably the most wordy and looks to be the most complicated page that you will see while configuring this type of flow. But the truth is, as I've said, if you read what they've put on the page, it guides you to making the right choices. The first thing we have to do is to select the object whose records trigger the flow. Think about it. We're working on the opportunity object. So here, we're going to input opportunity. Next, it asks when you want the flow to trigger. Your options are when the record is created, when it's updated, when it's created or updated, or when it's deleted. Now, you could choose when a record is created or updated, but I'm trying to encourage the users of my org to create their opportunities early. And this means that they should never be creating an opportunity and immediately filling in our reason for loss field. So I'm actually going to set mine on when a record is updated, because this way we're encouraging the users that if they want this automation to work for them, they have to work the way that our business wants them to and put their opportunities in as soon as they're identified, not only add them when they realise that they've won it or they've lost it. Next, we're going to set our entry criteria. We do have conditions for requirement. We don't want this to run on absolutely every opportunity. So we're going to change this to all conditions are met. And think about what we're trying to do. So the user inputs the reason for loss, and we then want this flow to trigger. So I'm going to look for my reason for loss field that we created, and I'm going to say when this does not equal blank. Or if you wanted to use flow terminology, there's another option in here. We can do is null false. So equals blank and is null false are exactly the same things in this situation. When to run the flow for updated records? We have two options here. We can run it every time the record is updated and meets the condition requirements, or only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements. What this means for us, if we choose the first option, once we've filled in the reason for loss field, every time anyone makes any edit to the record, even if it's not to the reason for loss field, this flow will trigger and it will change our stage to close lost again. Well, we don't need that. We only need this to run once. We only need this to run when the field was blank and is no longer blank. So we're going to set this to only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements. Okay, we're nearly there with this screen. The last part is about optimizing the flow. And you might think, well, I'm new to flow. How do I know how I want to optimize this? But again, if we read what's on the options, this will guide us to making the right choice. The option on the left is the fast field updates. And it says, update fields on the record that triggers the flow to run. This is a high performance flow and it runs before the record is saved to the database. The option on the right-hand side, actions and related records, says that this can update any record and perform actions like send an email. It's a more flexible flow and it runs after the record is saved to the database. Let's think about what we're doing. We're saying if we edit the current opportunity record to fill in the reason for loss, but we want to then immediately edit the same record to update the stage field. I can tell you that this means that we want fast field updates. And what it means by before the record is saved to the database is it means it's almost like you fill in that field and you would instantly see the stage field change too. It's not actually that instantaneous, but that's sort of how it feels. The after the record is saved means that you add the value to this field, you save it, it commits it to the database, it does all the validation rules, it does all of the Apex that's running after save and all of that, and then it would trigger the flow to update the stage field. You might, if you were expanding this scenario, this use case, you may choose to use the actions and related records version. For example, if you had a hierarchy of opportunities and you were filling in the reason for loss field on the parent opportunity, you may want to go and update all of the child opportunities as well. In order to do that, you would need to use the actions and related records, because once it's saved to the database, you want to go and edit multiple records. Okay, but as I said, we're leaving this on fast field updates and we're hitting done. Having got through all of that, we're actually at the point where everything becomes really easy. We've created the flow, we've said what object it runs on, we've set when it's going to fire, we've put an entry condition in, and we've optimized it. All that's remaining is for us to create the equivalent of that field update. And to do that, we're actually going to use an assignment. The assignment is going to be, I'm going to label it close opportunity. And I'm going to put a description because all good admins would. Set stage field to close lost. Now these descriptions have multiple reasons, but one of the really good ones is that if someone else looks at this flow in the future, we're telling them exactly what we intended it to do. So that means if they're testing the flow, they know what it was supposed to do, so they can decide whether it is doing that. If we leave the descriptions blank, The only thing that an admin has to go on as to what this flow is supposed to do is looking at how you've configured it. And you might have configured it wrong. So description's really important. Okay, now we just need to set our stage field. We don't need to create any variables in this case because we've already got a variable created for us called record. This is the current opportunity record that we're looking at. And as I said, we're going to set our stage field. So we start typing stage, the list filters, and we click on the field name that matches what we want. And we want the stage name to equal, so we leave the operator alone, close lost. And when I click in here, Flow knows that this is a pick list field. It knows all of the available values for the pick list field. So in here, I have my pick list values. I can scroll down and find my close lost value. There's no need for you to type the words close lost because every time you type, there is a chance that you'll type something slightly wrong. And then I hit done. And this is my flow complete. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to call it close loss opportunity when reason for loss filled in. Change stage to close lost when that reason for loss is and save. Now, before we activate this, I'm actually going to debug it. I'm going to check that it's actually going to do what I expect it to do. To do this, we have a debug button here. You'll see here that in the debug options, we've got options so we can skip the starting requirements if we want this to run on any opportunity. We can also run it as another user. So you're a system admin, you have more permissions than all your users. You can choose to run this as a specific user in your org just to check it works for their profile as well. And then the third option here is to run the flow in rollback mode. And this is auto ticked for us because we're in debug. But what this means is we can try running this on any opportunity, but it won't actually make the changes to the opportunity. So we're not changing someone else's opportunity. And that's exactly what we want in this case. Now I'm going to search for an opportunity. I'm actually going to search for a United Oil refinery generators opportunity. Now I'm taking a guess here that this is one that I actually want to work with. And when I click on it, you'll see that some of the fields I've got on the record have shown for me. So the whole point of this is what would happen if I edit the reason for loss field. If I scroll down, you'll see here's my reason for loss field. I'm going to add a value to it and hit run and see what happens. Now, the bold orange line shows you the route that it took through the flow. In this case, it's a very simplistic flow, so it's just a straight line. On the right-hand side, we can expand these and read how the interview started, whether the entry criteria were met. So the entry criteria is reason for loss is null, false. Then what did it actually do? So it goes through our assignment and it's saying that it has edited our record so that the stage name is close lost. And then finally it rolled back because we were running in rollback mode and it's all good. So it looks like this flow is working perfectly. At this point, I'm going to activate it and actually go and look at this running on one of my opportunities. This is the record that we just edited in rollback mode, but let's edit it in real life. You'll see that the stage is proposal stroke price quote. I'm going to fill in my reason for loss field and save it. And what you should see is the stage, they go instantly updating to close lost. So we know that our flow is working as we intended. The second part of our scenario is that the sales manager would like us to create some sort of a process that helps guide our sales users into creating multiple contacts for one account. And the reason for this is because they often miss out key fields like the address, And why would we ask them to fill that in when we actually want it to be the same as what's on the account? So we can create a screen flow to help our users with this. Let's go back into our setup menu. I've still got mine open, and go back to flow, and we're going to create a new flow. This time we're going to choose a screen flow because we do want to create something that guides our users through a business process, which is exactly what its description says. Again, we're going to choose auto layout. You'll notice that this time we're not presented with a long screen of things that we need to configure when we start building this flow. This flow doesn't care what object it's been launched from. It may not even have been launched from an object. You might host it on a tab of its own. So therefore, it's not asking all of these questions up front. With that said, however, we know that we're going to be launching this flow from an account because the idea is that we want to create multiple contacts from one account. So we do need to pass in the record ID of that account. But what we're actually going to do to start with is we're going to grab the details of that particular account. So we want to know what the values in certain fields are on that account. For example, the street, the city, the country. We're going to be copying all of them onto our contacts. So we need to go and get that account record. We click on the Add Element Plus. We scroll down to the Data elements, and we're going to do a Get Records. I'm going to call it account because that's what we're going to go and get. I'm going to give it description. My object is account. And then I have to tell it which account to get. We do want to give conditions because we don't want every account in our org. We only want a specific account. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to search for an account where the ID is equal to a value that we're going to give it. Now, to do this, we're going to create a new resource. It's going to be of type variable, and we're going to call it record ID. Now, that's record ID with a lowercase r and a capital I. This is a reserved name in flows. And by using this name for a variable, we are able to easily pass in the record that it is running off, whether we're launching this flow from a custom action button or from, we might put the flow on a screen, on an actual Lightning page, but record ID will allow us to pass that in really easily. So this is the record ID of the account. The data type is text because record IDs are text. Now, you could actually pass a whole record in, but if we did this, we couldn't then launch this flow from an action. Now, you might ask what's the difference between how you launch these flows. I'm going to show you that towards the end of this because I'm going to show you how to host this screen flow and how to get it to your users. The point is, I'm leaving this on text. Now, we don't want to pull in multiple records. We don't need to store multiple record IDs. We just want the one that we're launching this from. So we're not ticking this. We're not going to give it a default value. But what we do need to do is make it available for input. This means that when we launch this flow, we can pass in this variable to the flow. And when I hit done, you'll see that now our criteria for filtering the accounts that it's going to go and get is that the ID field equals record ID, the variable we just created. If you were collecting multiple, you could go and sort your accounts. You could tell it to store all records rather than just the first account. You can even tell it not to pull in all of the fields from the record. You might only want a few of them, but I'm actually going to leave these all as standard and not edit them. Next, we're going to start building our screen for the users to configure. We click on Add Elements and we choose an interaction element called Screen. And when we come in here, we have to give it a label. thing I like to do when I come into a screen is consider my buttons. These can be configured in the footer. Now, the reason I say that is because when you're using a screen flow, it's not always relevant to allow users to pause a flow or even go back to the previous screen, in which case you can hide the buttons. So here you'll see we can hide our pause and it's disappeared, and we can hide our previous. We've also got a new feature to use a custom label. I'm actually going to rename our next or finish button to save and next. This is because we're going to let our users come back to this screen multiple times, and I want them to realize that when they hit save, they are actually preparing this contact. They're essentially going to be creating this contact. So we want them to just have a double check that they've got everything correct on the page before they move on to the next. Now we're going to start adding inputs to the page for the users to interact with. If you think about your contact record, the most important thing they need to add is the person's name. And if I look at my input components on the left-hand side, you'll see that there is one here called name. And to use it, I grab it and drag it onto the canvas. I have to give it an API name. Doesn't have to be complicated. And you'll also see that there's lots of other fields that I can interact with underneath. Now, most of these I'm going to ignore because they're filled in for us already. You know, we don't need to worry about all of these. But I want my name, I want my users to include a salutation. I want to know whether it's a Mr., a Mrs., a doctor. And the way that I do that is by editing this fields to display field. And I add in the API label for that extra part of the name field, which I happen to know is salutation. If I've got it correct, when I sort of click out that field, you'll see the extra field appears there for me. The next thing that I want my users to add is an email address. In my org, this is a requirement for contact. And again, you'll have noticed that there's an input for email, and I've dragged it onto the canvas. I give it an API name. I want to make sure that this is actually a required field. So what I can see here is there is a field here that I can interact with called required. It's currently got a value of false, but I'm going to delete that and make the value true. So this means that this field is now required, and you'll see that the little red asterisk has appeared next to the email header. The next field that I want to add is phone. And if I scroll down my inputs again, I'll find the phone input. Drag it onto the canvas, give it an API name. And then let's have a quick look at the extra fields that we've got in here. Well, you see that we can set an input pattern. If we want users to make sure that they input their phone numbers as 3 numbers surrounded by parentheses, and then 4 numbers and a dash and 4 more numbers, we can actually put an input mask in there so that they have to follow that. If you want more information about what to type in there for the patterns, I suggest that you go online and you just search for the flow screen element phone and read up on it. We could also make this read-only or required if we wanted, but we're not interested in that. So we're going to leave all of these alone on this field. The final field that I want my users to fill in is actually job title. And if I scroll through my elements, you'll see that there is nothing for job title, but I'm going to just use a simple text input, drag that onto the canvas, give it a label of job title. And that's it. That will allow my users to add their job title. Well, that's all the fields I want my users to input. But there is one important thing that we also need to add to the page. And that is something for the user to say, yes, I want to add another contact, or no, I've added all the contacts that I want. Now, we could do this with a simple checkbox, but I'm a fan of some of the nice flow UI features. For example, this toggle down here. So I'm going to drag the toggle and add that to the page. I don't want the label to be toggle. I want the label to be add more contacts. And in this time, I've also got to give it an API name. Currently, when my toggle is inactive, you'll see that it actually says the word inactive underneath. Well, that's not very user-friendly, is it? When it's inactive, I actually want this to say no, i.e., do you want to add more contacts? No. So I come over here to the inactive label, and I'm going to type the string no. Now, this is a feature that you have to know a little bit of information about. When I type no, you would assume that I actually have to select one of these global constants that it's filtered to. Well, I know that I don't have to do that. I can just leave the word no. And when I click away, you'll see that it's now changed that inactive label to no. But what about when it's active? If I set the value to true, which means it is active, you'll see that it actually says active, which is also not very helpful. So I'm going to change my active label to yes. And again, I'm going to ignore what it's suggesting to me and just use the word yes. So there you go. Here's my toggle, add more contacts, yes. And if the value is false, i.e. it's inactive, you'll see it says no. Now let's consider, do we want to encourage the users to add more contacts, or do we want to encourage them to only add the one? Well, I'm going to assume they're adding lots of contacts. So I'm actually going to set my default value using this value field. I'm going to set that back to true. And this is everything that I want to add on my screen for the users to input. So I'm going to hit done. Now, having asked the user to input all of that information, we actually now need to collate it into a contact record. And to do that, we're going to use an assignment. So I click on my add element, I scroll down and I find assignment. I give it a label, description, and now what I need to do is create a variable that's going to represent this single contact record so that we can then populate the fields on it. To do that, I click in variable and I'm going to do a new resource. My resource type is still a variable because every time I use it, it's going to be different. And I'm going to give it an API name of contact record. Data type this time is a record. It's going to be a whole record. And the object is going to be contact. This is only going to represent one contact record, so I don't need to worry about adding multiple values, and I don't need it to be available outside of the flow, so I'm ignoring these options. So now you'll see over in our resources that I have a record single variable called contact record. But what are we doing in our assignment? Well, what we're doing is we're taking the inputs that the user has just filled in, and we're going to assign them to fields on this new contact record. So I'm actually going to click back in and click on this side arrow here. And the first thing that I'm going to assign is actually the account ID. We want all of the contacts that we create to be linked to the current account that we're looking at. So we're going to choose account ID. We're going to make it equal to the record ID variable that we created right at the start. Next, if you consider our flow screen, we ask the user for the contact's name. So we're going to start adding those. So I go to my contact record variable again, and I start looking for my first name. And I'm going to make that equal. And I come over here and I look for my screen components, my input screen components. I find my name, click to this side, and then I'm going to assign that the name that they fill in the first name field. Next, we're going to do last name. So I go into my contact record again, set the last name field, I'm going to make this equal the screen component name, last name. And then the final part of the name field that we added was the salutation. I come in here, salutation equals, find my name screen component and choose salutation. So that's my name. The next thing that we added was the email address. So again, I click in here, I go into my contact record and I find my email field. And then I assign it the screen component email. The next field our users will be filling in is the phone number. So again, we repeat the action of going to the contact record, finding our phone field. I'm going to use business phone and making it equal the screen component phone value. And finally, we ask them to add the job title. Contact record title equals. And this time when I go down to the screen components, you'll see that my job title field doesn't have a side arrow. This is because it's just a text field, but that's okay. We click on it and there we go. We've assigned the job title. We're not done yet though. Part of the point of this was to also put on the address from the account object. So we're now going to add assignments for the address fields. Unfortunately, you can't assign a whole address in one go. So we are going to have to do it for each part of the address. So like street, city, state, etc. Again, contact record, street. I'm going to go with mailing street. And this time, we're not interested in those screen components. We're actually interested in the record variable, the single record variable that we created right at the start, account from accounts. And we're going to click in that and then find the matching billing street value. Then we're going to add city. And again, we're going to go back to our account variable and find city. You'll see that this is very repetitive and you get very used to doing it. Oops. Okay, mailing state. Account state. Next up, we've got postal code. And then finally, we've got country. They are all the fields that we're going to pass into this new contact record. And we hit done. Okay, so what we've done is we've managed to create one contact record. But the purpose of this is actually to create multiple contact records. So what we need to do is we need to add the one record that we've created to a collection of records that we're actually going to then create at the end of our flow. And to do that, we do another assignment. Add element, assignment. We need to create a new variable to store multiple contact records. So we come in here, we do new resource, we select variable, and we give it a name. Remember that if it's asking for an API name, you can't put spaces in, but you can run your words together or use underscores. You have to tell it a data type, and again, this is a record data type, and the object is contact again. But this time we do want to allow multiple values. Once we've done that, you'll see it's auto-populated that in the variable. We click on the operators. you'll see that the options here are not the same as what we've seen before. They aren't equals and not equal to and everything like that. We've got some operators that are specific to record variables and collections. So I'm going to choose add because I want to add to the contacts for creation the single record variable contact record that I just prepared. And I'm not worried about the fields, I just want the records, so I don't need to click on any of these. And then I'm done. So let's recap. We went and got our account so that we had the address fields. We showed our user a screen where we asked for things like name, phone number, email. We prepared a single contact record with that information, combining it with the account information. And then we put that single contact record into a collection of contacts. But what we want to do now is we want to check, what did the user find on that screen? Did they want to add more contacts? So we're going to do a decision. Add elements, come down to the logic elements and choose decision. Then we set our options for outcomes. Well, outcome number one is that they selected yes, because they want to add more. And then we have to tell it what conditions mean that they selected yes, add more. I click into my resources and I scroll down to my screen components. I find my toggle and I'm going to pull out the value that they gave that toggle. And the value of that toggle, if it equaled true, i.e. active, then yes, they did want to add more. I'm now going to click on default outcome because if they didn't select yes, add more, they will have selected no, which means they didn't want to add any more. So I'm going to rename my default action, no, we are done. You'll see that Flow has now added two separate paths here for me. So we need to consider what we want to do, whether they answer yes or if they answer no. If they answer yes, what we actually want to do is take them back up to our screen and ask them to input details for the next contact. So what we're going to do is click on the plus to add an element, but rather than add an element, we're going to select connect to element. And that then means that I can click on the plus under the screen to say that this is how my path will go. Now, it hasn't drawn a line, but you can see it's got this dotted line and it's saying it's going to new contacts. And here's new contacts, you can see is telling you there's +1 connections. So that's if they've said yes. But if they've said no, what do we actually want to do? Well, we want to actually create those records. So far, they're just held in memory, but we want to save them to the database. And to do that, we're going to add a create records data element. I'm going to be creating multiple records. I mean, they may, of course, have only put details for one record in, but we're assuming that they're going to do multiple contacts. And then we pass in the record collection that we created earlier called contacts for creation. And this will create all of those records in one go. Now you could say we're done at this point, but I always think it's nice to display a screen to the users and to tell them whether this has been successful or not. So I'm going to create a new screen, which I'm going to call success. And then I'm going to add some text to the page just to tell them that everything's good. So I scroll down, I've got my display text. And then I type in here the exact message that I want them to see. I have some basic formatting options in here. If you highlight a bit of text, you can do things like change the colour. Oh, we don't want it red, do we? If it's success, we want it to be green. And we hit done and make it bold. And you'll see that the UI changes while we're here. Now, before I move away from this screen, I'm actually going to edit the buttons because I don't really want to show pause, previous. I just want the finish button. But what if it wasn't a success? What if create contacts actually hit an error? We have the option in Flow to add a fault path. This means if we weren't successful, we're going to go down a different path. To do that, I click on one of these pink action elements and I click Add Fault Path. And then in my fault path, I can add another element. I'm going to add an error screen. And the error screen is going to be very similar to my success screen. So I'm actually going to copy my success screen by clicking on it and selecting Copy Element. And then in my fault path, I'm going to paste my copied element. Now I'm going to go in and edit it. I'm going to rename it because this is no longer a success screen. This is now an error screen. And then I'm going to change my message so that it says, delete all of it, error. We couldn't create your contacts. Please speak to your system administrator to find out why. Now, the reason I'm directing them to the system administrator is because they will, if something's gone wrong, they will probably have received an error email with exact details of what was going on in the flow. And again, I'm just going to format it very simply. I'm going to make it red and then I'm going to make it bold, just so it's clear and done. And this is our flow. This is our screen flow. So let's save it. Having done that, let's just have a quick debug in here. The difference with debugging a screen flow versus debugging a record triggered flow is that it actually does make the changes to the database. So just bear that in mind when you're testing your flows. And when I come into my options this time, you'll see that it's asking me for an input variable. So if you remember, we need to pass in the account ID in order to test that this works correctly. So I'm going to just go back to my records and click on an account, copy the ID out of the URL, and then go back to my flow that I'm testing and paste it in. Hit run, and this is our flow. So we can interact with this as if it was, if we were a user. And I'm going to leave my toggle on add more contacts. I'm going to do save and next. Title. Okay. And I don't want to add any more contacts now, so I'm going to flip my toggle to no and do save and next. Yes, unfortunately, we're seeing the success screen. The contacts have been created and you can now close the window, which is great news. It means that things have worked as expected. If I close this and I go back to the account I was just looking at, if I reload the page, we should find 2 new contacts added to our contacts. So there we go. We've got our Juliet and we've got our Romeo, which is brilliant. Okay, but we're not done yet. First off, we need to go back to our flow and activate it so users can use it. Next, we need to actually find a way for the users to run this flow. Now, this could be through a button. It could be that you put it on the page layout. I'm actually going to create a custom action on the account in order for users to run it. And what that means is there will be a button at the top of the screen that they can click to add multiple contacts to an account. So I'm on my account page. I click on Setup and I'm going to go to Edit Object. Once I'm there, I'm going to go to Buttons, Links and Actions, and I'm going to create a new action. My action type is going to be flow. And my flow, it's already selected it for me because it's first alphabetically, but create multiple contacts. My label is, I'm just going to duplicate that. And save it. Now, having done that, my action is not on a page anywhere. The users still can't use this. So what I need to do is go back to my account object, go to my page layouts and edit as many of my page layouts as I want this button to be available. It's going to be in the mobile and lightning actions section. And if you haven't already overridden predefined actions, that's the first thing you're going to want to do by clicking on that spanner. And then you're going to grab your button and drag it to the page layout and hit save. If we go back to our account record, we need to reload the page. Now, sometimes when you reload, the buttons don't instantly appear. So if that's the case, you might need to wait 5 minutes or just do a hard refresh of the page. Unfortunately, there you go, my button has appeared immediately. And if I click on it, there you go, here is our flow on the page, which we can fill in and create multiple contacts. It's as simple as that. Don't be scared, go with the flow, have a go.